Hi everyone, welcome to today's video. My name's Stephanie and today I'm going to be showing you ILNP's Wildflowers collection. This is ILNP's second spring collection of the season and it features 6 bright shimmering polishes. As always, I will save more of my thoughts for the end after some comparisons. For now, let's just get into the swatches. So the first polish we have is Melody, and this one is described as a fiery orange enhanced by intense orange to green shifting shimmer. So you can see from the first coat alone that it kind of has that hot red orange sort of leaning color to the base, and it's a little bit sheer as well. Not quite a jelly, I would say, but just the typical ILNP formula where it's just sheer so that it allows all of the shimmer to really shine. I thought this one built up so beautifully in just 2 coats alone. From the first coat, I thought I might need a third for this one, but I don't think it's necessary. It just self-levels so beautifully. I don't know if you noticed, but I had a little bit of a bald spot near my cuticle area, so I kind of just dabbed over it, and you can't even tell that it's there. So while I don't consider this a spring shade for me personally, I do love how vibrant it is because I feel like it's the perfect shade to carry you into summer. I also couldn't capture the green shift on camera, but I love the golden yellow that you see here. Next up we have Willow, and this one is described as a lively lime green with matching lime green shimmer. So this one I found had a pretty similar formula to Melody, where the base is just a little bit sheer, but you can still see it is just so jam-packed with those larger shimmer particles. It self-levels really well, and as you can see here, it has really nice even coverage. Not that I personally would wear this one in 1 coat alone, but I think it definitely can work over another green. So of course I am going to be building this up on its own in a second coat here, which I think looked really good for the most part. Again, there is just so much of that shimmer that it really distracts from your nail line, but you could still see it a tiny bit, so I was curious to see how it would look on a third coat for this shade, and I just found it to be a lot more opaque. Not 100%, but you know, almost there, because obviously this is a little bit of a lighter color, but I really don't think a third coat is necessary unless you do have longer nails or a more prominent nail line. Color-wise, I feel like this is borderline chartreuse, but I still really like it. The next polish we have is Petals, and this one is described as a vivid magenta blooming with pink to orange shimmer. So no surprise, I love this one. It is just such a bright and vivid color. Even though similar to Melody, I wouldn't normally associate a pink this bright as a spring shade. I feel like I also have seen some Wildflowers with this bright pink color, so it totally works in my opinion, especially since this is the second spring collection and summer is right around the corner. I feel like this is another great kind of transitional shade. But anyway, back to the formula. This one had really great coverage on the first coat. It still was a little bit sheer in some spots, but I found this one perfectly opaque in just 2 coats alone. It is just so shiny and so twinkly, and I especially love the pink to orange shifting shimmer that you see in more indirect light. I feel like it just adds so much warmth to the shade. It is so stunning. Up next we have Songbird, and this is a vivid cobalt blue jelly sprinkled with holographic flakes, and no surprise, this is another one that I absolutely love, mainly because I just am such a sucker for this jelly flaky formula from ILNP. It is easily my top favorite finish from them, but the color is just so intense and so beautiful. So it might not look super impressive on the first coat because it wasn't very even coverage. There's just, you know, some light patches here and there, which honestly I think could be remedied if they switched over to a paddle brush like we see in their cream polishes. But it could also just depend on your application. You might have better coverage than me. Either way, it does build up really nicely on 2 coats. There is just still going to be some nail line because this is a jelly polish. So I wanted to show how much more coverage you get with a third coat, which does deepen or intensify the color ever so slightly, but I don't think it's totally necessary. It just depends on how much nail line you want to see, but it does become a little bit more obscured after the third coat. And now the moment I'm sure you've been waiting for, here is Bluebell, which is described as a sky blue jelly filled with illuminating orange to green shifting shimmer and a holographic sparkle. And this one, if it wasn't obvious, was directly inspired by Fairy Dust, which came out last year in the Fairy Forest Spring Collection. This is basically a sibling polish because it has the same shimmer and holographic sparkle. It's just a different base color, and it is so beautiful. Even though I don't think I totally agree with calling it a sky blue jelly, I feel like there's just a little bit of mutedness or dustiness to the color where it's almost like a cornflower, but either way, it's a really pretty blue that I think perfectly contrasts the orange shimmer that you see head on. It is just so stunning. I definitely think this one is so suitable for spring, but honestly, the color combination, especially when you see the more yellow shifts in indirect light, really remind me of the sun setting over the ocean. So I think this would be a beautiful summer color as well. Formula wise, this one was super easy to work with. It had really nice even coverage regardless of how many coats you do. Similar to other jelly based polishes, it just depends on how much nail line you like seeing. So I built this one up in 3 coats just to really intensify the color. And I saved my favorite for last. This is Flower Child, and it's described as a sheer soft pink jelly with radiant blue shimmer and holographic sparkle. And maybe I'm being hyperbolic, but I feel like this is the most beautiful pink polish I have ever seen. It is obviously a new favorite of mine. You guys know I just absolutely adore dreamy, ethereal pinks like this. I know a lot of people are just over this super intense blue shimmer because we just see it so often in the nail community, especially in the indie spaces. But honestly, this blue shimmer just has me in a chokehold, especially when it's in a pink base like this one. It is just so freaking beautiful. I can't stop gushing over it. But talking about the formula for a little, this one again had a very smooth, easy to work with formula. It just was the most sheer from the whole collection, where on the first coat it kind of just looks like you're wearing a topper, but I think that adds to the versatility of this polish. But it does build up beautifully in 2 or 3 coats. I will say on 3 coats though, you are still going to see some nail line, so if you don't like that, you might want to use a blurring base for this one. But you know me, I'm not bothered by that because I feel like it just adds to the etherealness of this color. And here it is with some indirect lighting, so you can see that shift to a slightly darker blue, almost indigo color. It is just so magical. And here I'm showing the collection worn as a Skittle in 2 coats each. I'm wearing Petals and Melody both on my thumb, just because I thought those 2 would be the closest. So this is in direct sunlight, and here is more indirect sunlight. I don't know if you'd really call it shade, but it's just lower lighting in general. And you can see this is really where the shimmer in Flower Child really pops. The other shades are still super sparkly and gorgeous, but yeah, on 2 coats you still see a decent amount of nail line. So I figured I can do a 3rd coat, especially for these 4 shades here, because I thought those were the more sheer ones. And it's still a little bit obvious in Flower Child and Bluebell, but it doesn't really bother me too much. So again, you might need a blurring base coat for these. But yeah, I just cannot get over how bright and sparkly these shades are. The shimmers are so glowy and shifty, especially in Flower Child and Bluebell, but the other shades are still super sparkly and twinkly too. And here is the collection lineup. At first, I was a little surprised by how bright some of these colors were, but honestly, for the Wildflowers theme, I feel like this lineup is so perfect. So getting into comparisons, we're starting with Melody, and the first shade that I immediately thought of was Cirque's Firecracker, which was one of their limited edition Do Good polishes from a couple of years ago. As you can see, they already look super similar in the bottle, but I did also want to compare it to Mooncat's Pandemonium from last year's Underworld collection. This is also a very intense, bright red shimmer, but it doesn't have the same warm golden orange shimmer as Firecracker or Melody. So while Firecracker Firecracker is pretty similar. That one is also a magnetic, so the shimmer I think is just a lot finer and more densely packed compared to the slightly larger shimmer particle that Melody has. So they're not exact dupes, but definitely really similar. Next for Willow, I knew I wanted to see this next to Clover, which was from last year's Fairy Forest collection. Even though that one is a slightly different finish where it's a more true jelly flaky type of formula, but Clover is a little bit more yellow. And here I also wanted to show it next to Frankie from last year's Halloween collection. Even though this one is a magnetic, I figured that they had a pretty similar sparkly green kind of vibe going on, but Frankie, as you can tell, is a little bit darker, and it definitely becomes a lot more obvious once you see them all on the nail. I'm wearing 2 coats of each, and you can see just how chartreuse Clover is, how much more sheer that one is, and how much darker the base in Frankie is, so no dupes here. I also wanted to show Willow next to Cirque's Tart from the recent Twisted Tea Party collection, but as you can see, that one is a much brighter, almost tennis ball kind of green color that also has a pink shimmer, so definitely not dupes, but I thought maybe something closer could be Cirque's All In from the Kelly Marissa collection last year. This one does have a little bit more of a similar toned green base, but the shimmer is a different color, and there's also a lot more holographic sparkle going on, so I wouldn't call them dupes, but they're giving off similar lime green vibes. Next up for Petals, I knew I had to show this next to ILNP's Showstopper from the New Year's Eve collection a couple of years ago. As you can see, these two are super similar. I think I would say that they do have the same shimmer pigment, it's just the base color that's a little bit different, where Showstopper is a little bit deeper, like it's the winter version of Petals, because even in indirect light, I feel like I saw the same color shifts, so not exact dupes, but I don't think you would need both of these. Speaking of color shifts, those also did remind me of KBShimmer's Rose Were the Days, which was a PPU polish from last year. So I thought maybe it could be a potential dupe for anybody who missed out on the shade, but unfortunately, these aren't really that similar. The main difference is when you see them head on, because you see that true magenta color in Petals. It's more when you see them in indirect lighting that they have that similar fiery orange copper kind of glow, but KBShimmer also has these extra hollow flakies, so definitely not dupes. Next up for Songbird, I knew I had to show this next to ILNP's Sea Glass from last year's Under the Sea collection. These two look like they could be super similar, but I think you could justify having both. You'll just have to see what I mean. But I did also want to show it next to Olive Ab's Coastal from last year's Summer Sunset collection. It's just another super intense bright blue jelly with this shimmer particle going on, which is definitely the main difference. Coastal having the shimmer versus Songbird having the little hollow flakies, but even aside from that, the base colors in all 3 of these are still pretty different. Sea Glass is definitely the darkest, and that one also has a more true like shimmer particle. It doesn't have the hollow flakies, but Songbird isn't as deep of a cobalt as these other two. And speaking of cobalt, I figured I could try to recreate Songbird using Cirque Colors Cobalt Jelly layered with Delirium, which is their hollow topper. And while Cobalt Jelly looks like it could be a perfect match, it actually is a little darker and dustier than Songbird is. So I feel like Songbird is almost like a cerulean or an azure shade. It's just not cobalt. And then for Bluebell, I of course had to show this next to Fairy Dust so you can see the siblings side by side. Again, these have the same shimmer, the same holographic sparkle, it's just the different base colors, so I would love to know what you think of this one. But as far as actual comparisons go, I was kind of reminded of Cirque's Hygge, which is this really beautiful warm shimmer in a light periwinkle base color that also has a hollow sparkle, but as you can see, it's a little too light. So for something a little darker, I thought of Starrily The Cat's Meow, which is kind of like a winter version of Hygge. So you would think just by the bottle shots that these are a little bit more similar, but once you see them on the nail, they do not compare at all. Starry's is actually just too dark, and Bluebell ends up looking a little bit more similar to Hygge in the end, but they still have a very different shimmer and finish, so definitely no dupes. And lastly, for Flower Child, I wanted to quickly show it next to Pixie Party, the pink from last year's Fairy Forest collection. These two are definitely nowhere near dupes. Pixie Party is much more of a warmer toned pink with more of a green shimmer head on. Flower Child is overall cooler, and it almost looks a little bit purple, so I did want to show it next to Fairy Dust as well. Obviously, next to a true purple like Fairy Dust, it does still look pink, but maybe a little lilac if anything. So obviously, these aren't dupes either, but they just have similar kind of vibes. For some actual comparisons, I immediately thought of Cirque Colors' True Love's First Kiss from their Far Far Away collection last year, but as you can see, the pinks are totally different, where Cirque's is a little bit more like a true bubblegum cotton candy kind of pink, and it looks like it has an even lighter shade of blue shimmer, but once you see them on the nail, the shimmer really stands out in ILNP, where it's just so glowy, and it kind of gets lost a little bit in Cirque's. So I thought for even closer comparisons, I can show this next to Mooncat's Moonrise, which came out in last year's Midnight Rodeo collection. This one definitely is a little bit more similar where it comes to that lilac pinky base color with a strong blue shimmer and holographic sparkle. And I also wanted to show it next to Nailed It's Library of Dreams, which is a Polish Pickup exclusive shade from last year. Again, it has a similar kind of colorway, but the pink base in Nailed It is even lighter, as well as that aqua blue shimmer. So overall, I would say that these three are definitely in the same family, but not exact dupes. But I do recognize that I'm a little crazy for saying that because these are, again, just so similar. You obviously don't need all three of these shades. I think if you already have one, you don't need the other two. If you missed out on Nailed It, you can't go wrong with either ILNP or Mooncat, but I do think Flower Child has the most glowy shimmer. So that wraps up my swatches and comparisons for ILNP's Wildflowers collection. As always, I would love to know your thoughts on this release, especially having a Fairy Dust sibling. I think I did see maybe on Reddit or maybe Instagram that apparently Flower Child is also like directly inspired by Fairy Dust. Though I don't think they're really calling it a sibling the way they are with Bluebell, because that's obviously much more similar to Fairy Dust. Flower Child has that similar kind of finish that we saw last year with like Pixie Party and some of their other shimmers, but it is just super glowy and I am obviously the most excited about that one. But overall, I think this is such a stunning collection. Obviously, I love these softer spring shades, but also the brighter pops of color. I feel like looking at this palette, you immediately get that sense that you're in this magical field of wildflowers, and I just absolutely adore that. So overall, huge fan. Would love to know if you're going to be picking up this whole collection, just some of the polishes, or skipping it altogether. As a reminder, these are going to be available on Friday at a discounted pre-order, so I will have ILNP's website linked down below, but make sure to leave me any and all thoughts that you have down below so we can chat about it. But thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!